Good morning, John. Great to see you. We're
Great
here
to
with
see you, Laura.
John Thorp, co-founder at Aerflo. Personally, very excited for this interview. I am a proud Aerflo owner. I love my portable sparkling water, and I really love the mission of the company that it's both environmental, it's convenient, it's a hot product. Like I look good walking around with it. So very excited, John, to hear how your team came up with the idea and how you've gotten to market.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for being a customer. Much appreciated. Maybe I'll just give a quick recap on the sort of founding story and our thinking behind it. I think so. Buzz and I, who's co-founder, we've been friends for a long time, and we sat down to think about starting a business together before we got to Airflow. And the very first thing on our both of our lists, we built these checklists, was we wanted to build a company where just inherently, so by earning that next dollar of revenue, by gaining that next customer, we made the world a better place. And for us, a lot of that like internal drive and mission comes from making the planet better. So we're moving beyond this trend of single-use containers for beverages. I'll explain a little bit about the product in a moment, but we just don't think that the single-use model of cans and bottles actually makes any sense. So certainly it's harming the planet in a really considerable way. It's also just really expensive for the end consumer. So we live in the sparkling water world. For many popular brands in the US and in Canada, people are spending like $4 a liter on sparkling water. That's crazy, and so on. Let alone some of the PFAS and toxin dynamics. So we're like, there's got to be a better way, and we want to build this inherent. We believe that the onus needs to be on the company to design better solutions for customers, not saying like, hey, Laura, please recycle that can after you're done drinking the sparkling water from it. So that's a little bit on the kind of founding story. We're just like, there must be a better way. So what we designed is a portable sparkling water system. So this device here does everything that a countertop system does. People are probably familiar with those. This is a proprietary CO2 capsule. So each one of these will make about 4 bottles worth of sparkling water. This just drops in, and then it just is the cap on your bottle. And then to carbonate, just tap on this button, which we'll talk about a little bit. I think some good stories from that. And as you tap, you'll see it carbonates. Give it a quick shake. And then one of the big things for us is you can customize your carbonation level. So 3 spritzes like that is sort of Perrier Pellegrino. If I do a fourth, you're looking in the Topo Chico land. Oh, and then I almost forgot. So then this is the really satisfying moment as you see all the bubbles form.
And I love, a bit about your backstory, and the topic, of course, today is people and
Yeah,
how product like what you've developed. I personally, when I heard about it, I was like, I cannot believe it took so long to get every time I go through any airport other than Toronto Pearson, I cannot find a sparkling water for the life of me. And I'm a big, drinker. But it's all about people. I mean, the idea came out of your team, your founding story, and then of course it grew, and now you're one of the most awarded early stage CPG companies I've seen. I mean, Fast Company is one of many. And I know, at the very beginning, yourself and Buzz, I think, you're a downtown Toronto guy. Buzz is, I think, from Wyoming. I might
he's from
have
Wyoming.
very much more, I'm going to say rural, you're more, so it's a very, different points of view. I guess even from those early days, talk to me about how that back and forth helped you come up with the idea.
Yeah, well, I think even, if we think about the two of us, that's where we came from. But even if you think about who we were at the moment in time when we started the company, so in our 30s, um, men of Caucasian descent living in New York City. We are very much not Airflow's target customer. Like that is very much the case. And it's something that we tried really hard to be self-aware of from day one. And I think that's really driven over time a lot of our, kind of people decision making, the thought process around innovation, and then how we think about making decisions, how we really try to ask those around us before making decisions just on our own. And I think that, if I look back at the 5 years that we've been in R&D mode and then launching just under a year ago, I think that not that I'm saying we've done a perfect job of it, there's always room to improve, but I think that self-awareness and is critical. as well as being, this kind of, we talk about it as the definition of innovation for us is being relentlessly thoughtful about our end customer. And so those two things go hand in hand, right? Like if we're not our target end customer, we need to admit the bias that we have when we think about system design, product design, marketing, messaging, and ask people on our team initially, a lot of the time, or outside of our team, about their perspective so that we can design something that's right for our customer.
Yeah, and I think that's so relatable, John. I mean, how many leadership teams? Usually it's what, 10 people, and they're serving thousands or millions of people. 10 people can never relate to thousands or millions of people. So maybe make it real for me. So how did you, two Caucasian men, I mean, who is your target customer early? I mean, everyone, but early on, who was the target customer?
Yeah, well, I have a really specific example that comes to mind from our innovation story that I'll get to in a moment. But out of the gate, as we launched in the fall of last year, our target customer, and then who I think we have seen the most success with generally, would be women kind of like 20 to 34, certainly a little bit more urban if we think about some brands where there's resonance. Think about things, everything from like sustainability minded, like a Blue Land or a Cotopaxi, to maybe let's think about your example of, it looks beautiful as you're walking around your workday, something like a Reformation, right? So like in that sort of zone is certainly where we've been living. We have some nicknames, conscious consumer and outdoor adventurer, like some of those sorts of dynamics. But as we think about, this idea that Buzz and I are not our target customer, so our product is intensely complex from an engineering perspective, and our goal has always been to make it incredibly seamless and easy to use for an end customer. So in that path during that time, we had, and I'll also mention our tagline is carbonation at your fingertips, right? As you're doing this. As we were doing some of the engineering work around the dynamics for pressing this button, so press to spritz or tap to spritz, Emily on our CX team flagged some really important considerations around grip strength, finger strength, nails, all of these things that for the two of us might not have come top of mind. And so, thankfully she did, which then led to an incredibly complex and like far over my pay grade engineering study an ergonomic study to make sure that the strength required for this button hits this sweet spot where if you have longer nails or don't have the finger strength, you can still use our product, but at the same time, it won't go off in your backpack or, my 11-month-old son is always trying to play with it and press the button and so on. But to me, as I look back over those 5 years, that's maybe the best example of, imagine if she hadn't said that. Imagine if we launched a product that was like unusable by 30% of, or just not delightful, maybe even go with that for 30% of our potential target audience. That's a huge problem and one that might not ever have been thought of or seen by us had we not had other voices in the room.
What a great counterfactual. I mean, the anecdote that I use all the time on panels is when people ask me about bias in the product development space, the perennial example is hand dryers that wouldn't turn on if Black people held their hands underneath because they weren't designed to detect colored skin. And to your
Fascinating.
point, that's a counterfactual, right? If you hadn't asked Emily, if you hadn't had women on your team, for example, possibly people with long nails couldn't have carbonated their beverage. And then your target market is,
Is
you know,
now shrunk by whatever percentage, a very meaningful one, and especially when you think about who, as we launch, our target personas are. So that one, it's almost like we need a poster of that example in our office to remind ourselves of like turn around and ask everyone else in the room and be ready to absorb different opinions because it's just so important.
so here's a curveball, John, and this was not in the pre-Q, but I mean, culture doesn't just happen. Emily raising her hand and sharing that feedback, Emily being on your team in the first place didn't just happen. And then, of course, feeling comfortable to say, hey, I've got a better idea, and I think we're really missing something. Um, Intentionally or not, how do you develop that culture where you have people able to share those views and catch those mistakes before they happen?
Yeah, I saw this is a couple of years ago, but a friend who's an entrepreneur published something in their company. It's a company called Crusoe around this phrase idea meritocracy. So like it doesn't matter where the idea came from. It's about the strength and quality of that idea and the relevance of that idea in the face of the challenge that you're trying to overcome. Or maybe even in our example, it wasn't necessary. We didn't even know that it was a challenge that we were trying to overcome, right? So as I think about it, it's you have to foster the culture that Emily was ready to raise her hand and say like, hey, I think we should think about this. Some of the things that we've done over the years, the one that comes to mind is whenever we do rounds of user testing is to invite people from the different parts of the organization. We're a small team, but from the team to come and join everyone from engineering, obviously CX, marketing, finance, to come in and help run those user test experiences so that everyone feels that they're on the front lines and that they're aware of some of the potential challenges that customers would face. So this idea of like looping everyone in so that they feel that they have the ability and power to raise their hand and say, hey, let's think about this.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, a lot of discussion these days around diversity versus meritocracy. And I think what you're saying is, listen, you can have a meritocracy of ideas, but if you have five people with the same idea, you're not really getting a great
Correct.
outcome.
Precisely. Exactly. That's a really good way to put it. And if you look at just to not to hammer on that one example, but if it had just been me and Buzz in the room, you're totally right, right? That idea would never have come in. So we would have had a meritocracy between two of us, totally missing the point of a very relevant product related dynamic for our customer base.
Yeah, so helpful. So now you've gone through the R&D phase, which I know was, long-winded, let's put it that way. Now you're in market. As you think about growth, as you think about growing your team and maintaining that culture, have you already faced any challenges with scaling? What are you thinking about building your team? What's in the way? How are you planning to keep that meritocracy of ideas alive?
Yeah, so I think we certainly, and part of the, our inherent values, we say, and I hope, very much hope, to pursue that as we think about pursue inclusion generally and diverse perspectives as we grow the team. But I think, especially as we look forward and the team grows beyond the dozen or so that it is now, it's so, so important to have checkpoints so that we don't find ourselves kind of like just blindly missing something.
Mm.
And so I think, that's, and generally Buzz and I sit down once a year, twice a year and say like, okay, what's the a product roadmap and then also just general hiring roadmap, but also how are we doing from the perspectives of people in the room, right? Like, are we covered as we think about what we need to be doing here? And I think as we grow, that starts to need, and for other entrepreneurs, that needs to be third party, right? Like you run the risk of bias continuing to creep forward. And so I think it's really important, something we'll be doing, of using third party tools, advisors, people other than the two of us to say, how are we doing? What are we missing? And are we doing what we said we set out to do?
Yeah, and getting that kind of, safe space that people can share feedback. I think one thing you seem to have done quite well is create that psychological safety so people can share their ideas. And as you become not everyone's line manager anymore, it might be a bit harder. So I think, yeah, providing that safety, when you're scaling can be, well, I mean, the difference between a well-run company and not. This has been fantastic. Before I let you go, John, I have two questions. One is if there is anything else that you'd like to share, secret sauce, mistakes that you've made that you've learned from. And the second is where could one purchase an Airflow if you're interested?
I appreciate it. Well, I think lessons. We've made lots of mistakes, lots of lessons learned. I think everyone always says, and it sounds so obvious and maybe a little bit basic about, hiring people are number one. And so many VC firms, have their own version of that story. I think as we reflect on that, it's 100% true in the case. You can have the best possible product idea and IP and so on, and without people to go make it happen and be thoughtful and solve problems because there's one every day, you're never going to get there, or you're never going to truly be successful. When we set out for any hiring initiative, one of the rules that we make is to hire people who are better, faster, stronger, have a different perspective than we are for that part of the business. And our goal is always to work ourselves out of jobs. That's
Mhm.
always our goal. However, the one thing that I think, as I look back, before that happens, what Buzz and I always try to do is to do that job ourselves in some way. Like we always have the willingness to say, like, I don't know anything about that. I'm gonna go try and learn everything I can, do that job. At the same time, have the humility to say, like, hey, I'm like I've taken it as far as I can. We need to go find an expert. And the goal here is to find someone to come in and work ourselves out of jobs. That's always the objective. And I think that that like duality of be ready to learn it and do it yourself with
Mhm.
also trying to have the humility of like go find someone better has been pretty important for us. We've made mistakes 100%, but at the end of the day, if you don't do that, you're not answering for the number one most important thing, which is to bring great people into the company and those who are going to really drive things forward and allow us to, not that we're afraid of work, but to go focus on other things and know that that lane of the company is totally taken care of. So it's maybe, it's something that's said so often, but it's maybe a slightly different way of thinking about that dynamic at the company. Um, and then yeah, Airflow.co is where you can get it. We're also live at a few retailers, from Goop, Huckberry, Uncrate, Food 52, Bespoke Post, and Uncommon Goods.
Amazing. I feel like I should get a promo code.
Yeah, yeah, or
Use every
use
buy when I do. I love mine.
exactly use the promo code Diversio10.
John, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. What a great anecdote. I think our listeners will get a lot of value from it. So again, keep doing what you're doing, and it was a real pleasure.